In the quiet outskirts of Alberta, a small town carried a story most had forgotten, buried beneath time and silence. It began in the fall of 1930, when a class of Indigenous children at the local boarding school simply vanished. No announcement, no search. Just one day, their names were scratched from the roll call, their desks left untouched, their dorm beds still made. Some locals asked questions at first, but the school said the children had transferred. The townspeople, perhaps too used to the shadows cast by these institutions, let the story drift away like smoke. Decades passed, the school shut down. Its buildings were left to rot under overgrowth and rust. But in 1975, during a routine check of an abandoned homestead nearby, Sheriff Thomas Keene stumbled on something chilling. Behind a collapsed barn wall, beneath layers of dust and age, he found boxes of sealed documents, sold class records, faded photographs, and one disturbing journal entry written in shaky handwriting. They took them at night, told us not to speak. But I remember their names. Sheriff Keene couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just paperwork. It was a truth someone had tried very hard to bury. As he dug deeper, he began noticing names in the documents that didn't match any town records. There were no birth certificates, no families listed, no follow-up files. It was as if these children had never existed at all. And yet, something more. Someone wanted their story to finally be heard. Sheriff Keene took the documents home that night, laying them out across his kitchen table. The photos were black and white, faded around the edges, but clear enough to show young faces, children dressed in identical uniforms, lined up stiffly in front of the school's brick building. Their expressions weren't joyful. Most stared blankly at the camera, a few with eyes that hinted at fear or confusion. One name kept appearing across multiple pages: Elsie Redfern. Her name was circled in red on a list of class names, and in the margins of the journal someone had scribbled, "She knew too much." Keene started asking around, carefully. Most of the older townspeople seemed hesitant to speak, brushing off the school's past as something best left alone. But a retired nurse who once worked at the school's infirmary finally gave him a small lead. She remembered Elsa, not just her quiet intelligence, but how often she'd show up with bruises or strange marks. "That girl wasn't sick," she said softly. "She was scared." Digging deeper, Keene learned that several teachers and staff from the 1930s had resigned suddenly or disappeared from records around the same time as the students. No death records, no forwarding addresses, just gone. Meanwhile, the documents he found were starting to vanish too. A file he'd left on his desk at the station went missing overnight, and his house was broken into, but nothing taken except a single photo of the class. Whatever this was, someone still didn't want it uncovered. Sheriff Keene couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he drove out near the abandoned school grounds, an old pickup would pass by slowly, the driver hidden behind dark windows. Even at the diner, where gossip usually flowed freely, conversations would stop the moment he walked in. The town wasn't just hiding something, it was actively guarding it. He started looking into local land records and discovered that the school had been built on land forcibly taken from a nearby Indigenous community in the early 1900s. Strangely, no official transfer ever showed up in county archives. It was as if the land had just changed hands in silence. Keene decided to visit the remnants of the reservation, now reduced to a small patch of scattered homes and dry fields. There he met Thomas Gratail, one of the last elders still living on the land. At first, Thomas was cautious, even cold, but when Keene showed him the class photo, something changed. Thomas stared at the picture for a long time. "Elsie was my cousin," he said finally. "She warned my father they were doing things to the children, taking them underground, where the walls bled." Keene didn't know how to respond. Thomas continued that school wasn't just a place of learning. It was a place they used to erase us. Meanwhile, Keen's deputy, a young officer named Sarah, found strange symbols carved into the stone near the school's basement. Symbols that didn't match anything they'd seen before, except in Elsie's drawings. The sheriff's hands trembled slightly as he held Elsie's drawing up to the stone wall. The carvings matched perfectly twisting lines and circles that seemed more like a warning than art. Sarah stepped back, flashlight flickering as they stared at the damp basement walls. The air was colder down here, heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. But the dust was uneven. Something or someone had been through recently. Outside, sudden gusts slammed the old door shut, sealing them in darkness. Sarah's flashlight dropped, spinning light across the basement floor, landing on a metal hatch half buried under rotted floorboards. "That wasn't on any of the old building plans," she whispered. Keen pried it open with a rusted crowbar. The stale scent of old earth and something fouler drifted out. A narrow stone tunnel led downward, with steps that seemed older than the school itself. As they descended, the carvings became more frequent. Some were crude faces, others looked like twisted animals. Sarah's breath quickened. What kind of school was this? She asked. Then came the humming. Low, distant, almost human but layered, like more than one voice murmuring at once. They paused, flashlights shaking, every step feeling like a mistake. Sheriff Keen's radio crackled with static. Then a child's voice whispered through. "Asterisk, help me." Asterisk Sarah looked at him, eyes wide. That sounded like Elsie. Neither of them spoke after that. They kept moving deeper into the earth, unaware that someone or something was now moving behind them. Sheriff Keen and Sarah moved deeper through the stone tunnel, the air growing colder and tighter with each step. The carved walls gave way to old wooden beams, some rotted, others freshly broken, like someone had passed through recently. They reached a chamber where the stone ceiling opened into what looked like a forgotten root cellar. But the most chilling part wasn't the structure, it was the small, rusted desks lined up in rows, just like a classroom, underground. A faded chalkboard leaned against one wall. On it, the same symbols from Elsie's drawing had been etched, but this time in what looked like red dust or clay. In the corner sat a stack of books with pages torn out, each bearing the names of the missing children. It was clear this room hadn't been used for decades, but someone had been keeping track. Just then, Sarah stepped on something half buried beneath the dirt. She bent down and pulled out a tin lunchbox, sealed tight. Inside was a photograph. It showed the class from 1930 again, but this version was different. The children looked the same, except their eyes had been scratched out. And there, in the background, barely visible, was a man no one had seen before. Dressed in a dark suit. Expression blank. "What is that?" Sarah asked, voice shaking. Keen didn't answer. Because beside the man, almost faded into shadow, was a second figure wearing a modern sheriff's badge. One that looked exactly like his. Sheriff Keen stood frozen, staring at the photo in his hands. The man in the background. It wasn't just someone wearing a similar badge, it was him. Same face, same eyes. But how could he be in a photo from 1930? Sarah backed away slightly, sensing something was deeply wrong. The humming grew louder again, no longer distant. It filled the underground space like it was coming from the walls themselves. Suddenly, the lights on their flashlights flickered and went out. Complete darkness swallowed them. Sarah reached for Keen, but he was no longer at her side. Panic set in. She called his name, voice echoing in a strange, warped way, as if the tunnel was shifting around her. Then, a soft glow began to pulse. From the walls, those same chalk-like symbols lighting up in rhythm with the humming. Keen reappeared, staggering from another corridor. But something was off, his face pale, his eyes distant. He held out a small wooden box. "They wanted it returned," he whispered. Inside were dozens of rusted name tags, each with a child's name and the school year 1930 etched into the metal. As they stepped out into the tunnel to leave, the ground began to rumble. Behind them, the chamber collapsed. Dust filled the space, but they were safe. Or so they thought until Sarah checked her recorder later. Amid static and muffled sounds, a voice whispered, "Asterisk, he was always one of us." Asterisk, and for a brief moment, Keene's reflection in the mirror behind her wasn't alone in the weeks that followed. Sheriff Keene and Sarah filed a quiet report, carefully worded, leaving out the parts no one would believe. The tunnel beneath the old school was sealed off, officially marked as unstable and unsafe. Locals were told it was part of an old mining shaft, long forgotten. But Sarah knew better. She kept the photo, the metal tags, and the audio recording stored in a private folder, evidence of a chapter no one else was willing to face. Sheriff Keene changed. He became quieter, more distant. Some in the town thought he was simply tired, worn out from years of chasing cold leads. But Sarah noticed the way he would avoid mirrors and how he never entered the church again. He'd say he didn't remember parts of that night, but when she brought up the photo, he'd get silent. She often wondered if a part of him never made it back. The town moved on, as it always did. Small things lingered. Children at the nearby school sometimes drew the same strange symbols.